Hi, it's Alicia Rossi here, just filming my video for my leadership reflection. So just to begin with, the first topic I'm going to be discussing is emotional intelligence. So I found this really interesting when we covered it in the labs because I've always considered myself quite emotionally aware. However, this lab really taught me to break it down into the different components of emotional intelligence and really look at specific areas in terms of emotions. So I watched a video that spoke about the importance of knowing what you're feeling and why you're feeling it when you're making decisions both professionally and personally. It also spoke about the importance of drawing on your own emotions before you actually make a good decision. I also read an article that spoke about emotional intelligence as one of the essential cognitive capacities or abilities that we need to be a good leader. So I thought that linked in quite well as well, just looking at how emotional intelligence actually impacts a person's ability to be a leader. And what I learned from this that I can apply to my OT career is that one of my strengths is definitely interpersonal relationships, as I do consider my communication skills to be one of my strengths. This would come in handy as an OT, as it means that it's going to strengthen my ability to build a professional network, but it's also going to allow me to build rapport with my clients as well. I also think one of my strengths is emotional self-awareness, which means I can recognize the impact of my emotions on my own performance. So for example, I do know that when I feel anxious, it does impact the way that I perform and my ability to concentrate. A couple of my weaknesses, one of them is definitely impulse control. Sometimes I find myself making decisions without properly thinking it through, which would impact my me as an OT, as it might mean that sometimes I'm not really looking at things properly before I make a decision, which is really important in terms of clinical reasoning. And making sure you're delivering that really high quality care to a client. And another thing is just stress tolerance. Sometimes I find myself dealing with stress in unhealthy ways. So just getting on top of that as I go into field work, as I do know field work is a very stressful time as well. Another one of my topics is workplace culture. So I chose this topic because I've actually experienced quite a lot of different workplaces already, and I've really come to realize the impact that workplace culture has on my performance and my desire to succeed at work as well. So I watched a video which I thought was quite interesting, and it spoke about when we do feel psychologically undervalued at work, it often means that we do protest subconsciously. So what this means is that we might go against the workplace values, or we might not end up trying out to our best of our ability as we normally would because we don't agree with the workplace culture or don't feel comfortable in it. And I also read an article that spoke about how workplace culture is actually quite a difficult thing to define, which made me reflect on what I think workplace culture is, which for me it's the feeling that you get in a workplace that's caused by the environment and the people that are surrounding you and the dynamic that is a result of that as well. So to apply this to my OT career, I think that it's really important for me to realize that there's a high possibility I will get put in a workplace that I don't feel comfortable with the workplace culture, or it perhaps doesn't sit right with me. But it's really important that I can recognize that, but not let it affect my work and my drive. So just understanding that the impact that workplace culture has on the environment may mean that I can look for ways to improve the workplace culture. And this might just include me just being really authentic and true to who I am, and also maintaining my professionalism regardless as well. And my third topic was social determinants of health. So I chose this topic because I'm quite passionate about health, and I do consider myself very fortunate to live in somewhere like Australia where we do have great access to healthcare. So I've looked at a report by the World Health Organization, and they really spoke about the social gradient that actually exists purely due to unequal distribution of income or power. And I thought that was really interesting because I suppose I haven't really thought about it in terms of, where you're born and where you're brought up has a huge impact on those social determinants, and also has a huge impact on perhaps your views towards health, the healthcare you've received, and your ability to accept help as well, or ability to accept services. So I think this would impact my career as an OT, as it just means I need to be mindful of all those different social determinants, which are kind of like the environmental factors as well that will impact a person and perhaps how they present in a health service. And also recognise how fortunate we are in Australia and make use of those resources, expertise and facilities that we do have here to deliver that high quality healthcare to patients as well. Okay, so looking at something I would change with my project. So just a real quick rundown of my project. It's basically aimed at children who have parents who are alcohol abusers, and basically they're going to be creating something at school that's a tangible physical product, but then also going to be having lived experience educators coming in and teaching them strategies to cope at home in terms of confidence, self-esteem, resilience, all of those kind of things. So I did read an article that spoke about the challenge of community, the challenge of addressing the community environmental factors as opposed to individual. So it spoke about how we can address a community, but then sometimes it's hard to address the individual. So I think what this made me reflect on is one thing I would potentially change is just that where does our project go beyond the 10 weeks? I'm not sure that it can be sustained, and I suppose our project is about, let's say that the children decide they want to build a gazebo and that's their project. Once the gazebo is built, I'm kind of like, well, where to from there? And I do recognise they're going to have these new relationships and potentially have learnt these new skills and built confidence from the skills that they've actually showed in terms of building the gazebo, for example, or something like that. But it's sort of like, it sort of stops there. So I think if I was to do it again, I would try and think further into how we can keep it something that's actually maintained beyond the project. And potentially that could just be building something new, or potentially it could be, building something that can be continuously worked on. But yeah, so that would probably be one thing. And the other thing for me would be evaluating. So I read a systematic review about evaluations, and there were two main things that stood out to me. So one was that they recommended evaluating throughout the community-based project, and two, they recommended evaluating both quantitative and qualitative measures. At the moment, we decided we wanted to do a questionnaire at the start and the end, so a qualitative measure. However, I think adding potentially really brief surveys in between to see the progress throughout the program would be really good, and also implementing quantitative measures at the start and end because for certain outcomes such as school attendance, because that could be a really good way to measure as well, which we didn't really think about too. Okay, and my ways to improve leadership. So I read an article about vision, so ability to see the whole future, ability to look ahead. And I think this is something that I really struggle with because I also read another article about Steve Jobs, and they spoke about his high degree of passion and how his passion really ended up generating passion for the people around him, for his love for computers and design, and he was such a successful leader. So what I sort of thought about that is I think I struggle with that side of things because I find it hard to look forward, and I'm really the kind of person who focuses on the present. And I also find it hard, I'm quite realistic, I suppose, and I find it hard to look at these really big ideas and feel like they're going to work. So I think that's something I really need to improve on, because I think there's nothing better than seeing a leader who's super passionate about what they're talking about and super passionate about what they want to do as well. And the last thing is accepting that I could potentially fail, and accepting that there are risks and uncertainties in being a leader. That's a big weakness of mine. I don't like to put myself in situations where I do know I'm going to fail. In fact, I usually always avoid it. I also just don't like the feeling of uncertainty as well. So I just read an article about it saying that handling risk successfully is really important to being a leader. So that's somewhere that I definitely really need to improve on as well. Thank you.